Hello and welcome back to the Orlando Adventures podcast. I'm your host Russ, and today's episode is the Driving in Orlando one. So this feels like a classic Orlando Adventures episode. This is the kind of episode that I was doing, I would probably say more frequently at the start, but I love an episode like this. I love an episode where I can hopefully share a bit of info, and hopefully I can kind of be useful and give you guys a bit of guide and a bit of advice and guidance to a topic that you may not know a huge amount about, or you may have questions on. So I really wanted to do an episode like this, and I've wanted to do one on driving in Orlando specifically for quite a while. And I know I say that with every topic at this point, but that's because when I thought of the idea of doing the podcast, I did come up with a list of about 200 things I wanted to talk about. So, and that list is ever growing. So, driving in Orlando, it felt like a right time to do it. It felt like the right time to do it because I feel like a lot of people are probably in the process right now of either booking a trip or thinking about booking a trip. And one of the factors for quite a few people, in my mind, will be whether or not to get a hire car or not. I know that throughout kind of like the COVID years especially, a lot of people kind of went away from the hire car because it was hugely expensive. It basically was, it priced a lot of people out of doing the hire car. And you've got places such as Disney, and I use Disney as an example, who have such amazing transportation kind of links and transportation options that actually having the hire car might not have been as essential an option as maybe it was in years gone by. So I basically wanted to get into it. I wanted to get into, do you need a hire car? Like that's going to be one of the main questions. Do you need a hire car? Obviously, we're going to get into all of these kind of topics. Where to get a hire car from? Where should you get one? Where would I recommend getting one from? Is it cost effective to get a hire car at this point? So in this day and age, where we are now in 2025, is it worthwhile to get a hire car over getting Lyfts and Ubers, for example? Well, we can look into all these things, and realistically the numbers, if I quote any numbers, they are rough figures, because unless I'm out there or I'm there booking a car right this minute, it's going to be difficult for me to like fully give you specific numbers, but I will give you a rough guide for sure. So if you're listening to this in the summer of 25 and the prices have gone up, then apologies. But yeah, obviously the prices are ever changing, so please don't quote me on the numbers, but at the same time they might give you an idea in terms of a guide in comparison to things such as parking, which I'll talk about as well. So first things first, if you were to hire a car, and it's difficult because obviously myself and Annie going out to Orlando, we don't need a massive car. We basically can get away with getting the smallest thing that they've got on offer. We can fold down the back seats, we can chuck our suitcases in the back of the car, and it's not really an issue. If you're a family of four, obviously it certainly becomes a different scenario, doesn't it? You need a full-sized SUV or something like that to be able to get your suitcases in. Obviously, you've got to think about the comfort of it. You've got to think about the comfort, in the nicest way. Have you got more elderly passengers with you on your trip who potentially are going to need to be more comfortable, who aren't going to want to be crammed in the back of a car if there's 5 people with 3 sat across the back row, if you know what I mean? So it might be worthwhile looking into kind of like the size options. Obviously in Orlando and in America in general, the cars that they drive are typically bigger than what we would have in the UK. But I can base it on one thing, so I can only base it on basically what I would do. But the price of a medium saloon, if I look at a medium saloon for 2 weeks, if I look at it right now, it's about $600 ish. Again, don't quote me, but about $600. So $600 as an outlay might sound like quite a lot. That's £300. It's $300 a week. You divide that kind of by 7, and it's about 40. I'd call it $45 a day. You basically need to have saved yourself $45 a day in travel for that car at $600 to be worth it. There are additional costs as well. So that does go up a little bit. So you've got things like fuel, depending on how much you're driving around. Obviously, your fuel bill is going to go up slightly, but I will say that the fuel in Orlando is not even in the same ballpark as what it is in the UK. I have often found that I've rarely spent more than like $100 total, like in a trip. It is a lot cheaper. It seems to go an awful lot further. So there is that to kind of bear in mind as well. You will get offered. So when you go and pick your car up, you're going to get offered to like upgrade. They're going to try and tempt you to upgrade. You need to stay strong on it. If you're not looking to upgrade and spend more money, you need to be a little bit strong, because they're clearly quite good at what they do, and they'll basically say, "Oh, we've got like I've had it before. Trust me, I've got that before." And I think I hired a Mustang once, and I went to the desk, and the guy's like, "Oh, you got the Mustang." He's like, "I've got an upgrade for you if you want it." And I'm like, "Yeah, go on then." He's like, "Oh, I'll give you the 5 litre GT. I think it was a 5 litre one. I'll give you the GT version of the Mustang." And I was like, "Well, yeah, and I really appreciate that." And then he kind of like starts setting it all up, and I was like, "I'm not paying for it." Like, he's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's like $300 more." I was like, "Well, the way you were talking, you were just going to give it to me." So you just need to be a little bit strong. But at the same time, on our most recent trip, and you would have seen this on the travel day vlog from Sunday, that we actually booked the cheapest car option there was, or I certainly booked the cheapest car option that there was, because I knew that me and Annie weren't going to need a big car. So I went for like a compact, and basically we got to the desk and the guy was like, "Well, I'm going to give you a free upgrade." And I'm like, "Here we go." And he's like, you're not going to have to pay for it. I'm just going to give you it. I don't know whether or not what the situation is that they basically try and get you in on the cheapest price. Like anything, it will say like car hire from $255, and you go, "Oh, it's amazing." But then you go, "Oh, actually, we need a full size SUV for a family of 6, and now it's going to cost us $1,000." Like, so they kind of it's that price is the one to get you in. That's the advertising price. But I basically was like, "Well, I'm going to book the advertising price car then," and it might be that they just don't have many of them. So if they don't have many of them, they might have to give you an upgrade because they don't have a car available. So that might be something to think about as well. But also, don't quote me on that, because if you book, I don't know, something tiny and you end up with something tiny, thinking you're going to get a free upgrade, then don't be too disappointed. But yeah, anyway, the other things you've got to bear in mind. So you've got things like extra insurance. They'll always try and like upsell you on the insurance. They'll tell you at times, they'll kind of scare you into thinking that you're going to need kind of all this extra cover and stuff. You are covered. You are insured. Like, you're not booking a car without insurance. They can't hire you a car without insurance. You will have a fairly basic level of insurance. So obviously, yeah, you can pay more for it to go up. I would personally never pay it. I would personally say, I've got insurance. Obviously, no one's ever planning on having an accident, but I feel confident enough that actually I'm not going to need to go and spend hundreds more dollars just to insure my car. It's not the one. You may need to pay extra to get additional drivers onto it. I don't know how much it is. Sometimes I have had it before where sometimes, depending on like the cover, you can get someone on there for free, or you might have to pay like $150 per additional driver. If that works out for you and you want a couple of you to drive because you're doing longer drives, then fair enough. But you just got to weigh up the kind of pros and cons for yourselves. Where do you hire a car from? So this might sound really stupid, but so whenever I do it, I've always done it from the airport. So obviously I've pre-booked it. Over here, I've gone on like a comparison site, for example. I found a deal, and when I look through the deals, I always look for a couple of different things. So I always look for the main companies. So if I'm talking about main companies, I'm talking about like Alamo, Dollar, Hertz. I think it's Eurocar. Basically look for the big name brands, but also look for cars that you pick up directly from the airport. In my opinion, the last thing I want to do, and I have done this before, and to be fair, I haven't done it in Orlando, but I've done it in other countries. The last thing I want to do is do a travel day, faff around going through the, getting your bag and stuff like that at the airport, and then go, right, now I've got to go and get on a shuttle bus over to somewhere else to go and pick my car up. I can't be bothered with that. I would rather pick it up from the airport, drive out, you're done. And then you're off to Disney, for example. So that's what I would do. I would always look for pickup from the airport, and I would always look for the big companies. There will always be cheaper alternatives off-site with companies that you've never heard of. That's up to you. I wouldn't personally take the risk on it. Those are the companies to me that I feel like are gonna kind of get you. They might get you on like damages on the car, or like they're going to charge you silly amounts of money if you haven't topped up the car with fuel. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, for a peace of mind for me, I would go with one of the bigger companies and be done with it. So that's what I do. So there's a few things that we've got to kind of like figure out. Obviously, say you've hired your car, you've gone with Dollar, you've picked it up from the airport. You're gonna now drive to Disney, for example. So the first thing you might have to think about on the roads, and I'm still talking on costs here, is that you might actually incur tolls. So you can get things such as like a toll pass. I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember what it's called. There is like a toll pass. You can get one for free, and you can basically pay lower rates for tolls and stuff. You can just pay for the tolls at the tolls. You can get a thing called a Sun Pass. Like, it depends how long you're out there. If you're out there long enough, then you can look into different options. Or if you just go, you know what, I can't be bothered to faff around with any of that, go on your maps or Google Maps or whatever and just put avoid tolls. You might add a few minutes on your trip, inevitably, because you're going to go a longer route. But if you can't be bothered to mess around with the tolls, then it's an option. However, I will say, if you're doing longer journeys, so I'm jumping forward a little bit here, but if you decide you're going to go to Busch Gardens or you're going to go to Kennedy Space Center or something, I would do the tolls personally, because your trip will be so much quicker. But that's up to you. Work it out, weigh it up, figure out what works best for you. So we're talking, you've got a few different costs, and realistically, you're probably at $50 a day with tolls, fuel, and the actual car hire itself. You're probably looking at about $50 a day in my example of a medium saloon. So you've got to try and beat $50 worth of travel per day in value to yourself. Obviously, if $50 per day is worth it to you, then you don't need to justify it. It doesn't even matter, does it? But if you're weighing this up against, for example, getting an Uber or a Lyft, then we need to look at the Uber or Lyft option. So an Uber or a Lyft, for example, and this is rough numbers as well, it's anywhere between about $40 to $50 from MCO, and we're doing this from MCO over to Disney. All right, so that's what I can work out. It's $40 to $50 there or thereabouts, depending on what time of day, all that kind of jazz. So day one, like your travel day and your travel home day, your car is going to cost you the same amount as that travel just to get to Disney. So that's 2 of your days where you're pretty much quids in. So the rest of the days you've now got to figure it out. Now there obviously is going to be potential other fees to incur as well. So this is where we're going to get into kind of hotels and stuff. So if you've driven all the way to your hotel, and let's say that you're staying at Universal, and I use Universal as an example specifically because you have to pay to park there. So you need to pay, and I believe it's around $20 per day to park at Universal, a Universal hotel. Okay, so $20 per day just to park your car there. Obviously, your $50 is now going at $70 if you're staying at Universal. So now we're starting to go up in the prices. Obviously, if you made your way over to Universal via an Uber or a Lyft, and then you just used Universal transportation, let's be real, that is going to be cheaper. That is a cheaper option if you are prepared and all you want to do is just do a Universal holiday, stay in the bubble, and use a Lyft here and there just to either dip over to Disney or do a trip to Walmart or something like that. It'll be cheaper. Let's just be absolutely straight clear on that. So, however, if you're staying at a Disney hotel, for example, you don't have to pay for parking. Okay, so you're not incurring these charges, And this is the same for some other hotels as well. Like, I'm pretty sure at Rosen Inn you don't have to pay for parking. Like, there'll be loads of different options. But obviously I can't go for every single one. I can only talk through a couple. And I'm, specifically going to look at Universal and Disney because they're kind of the two big options, aren't they? So say you went to stay at a Disney hotel, say you stayed at an All-Star, you won't have to pay to park there. So you're not incurring an extra cost. The other thing you'll have is that if you, and let's exclude like annual pass holders and all that kind of stuff from these kind of topics and this kind of discussion, but say you then went to Disney and when we want to go to any of the parks, well, now you're going to have to pay around about $30 per day to go into the park with your car. So you're now incurring extra charges. However, if you stay on site at Disney, you don't have to pay for the parking. So there is a huge benefit to staying at Disney. However, obviously the Disney hotels come at more cost. So it's trying to work out this juggling act of where are you saving the money, where are you spending the money? Are you spending it on the front end on the car, or are you saving it on the back end with the transportation? Are you saving it through the parking and stuff like that? This is the things to weigh up. There are a lot of different factors, and ultimately if it doesn't matter to you and cost isn't the huge factor when it comes to the car, then I would recommend getting the car. Like, straight up, if you're basically saying I want the car for the benefits, then get the car. Like, that's the one. But if you are looking at it from a budgeting point of view, these are the things that we just basically need to try and establish. Obviously, if you are parking at hotels, obviously Disney, if you stay on site, like I said, then you get the parking for the parks included. If you stay at Universal, you don't get the parking included. So you are going to be spending quite a lot of money just on parking at Universal. It's something to bear in mind. Obviously, the Universal hotel will be slightly cheaper than the Disney one, but how much cheaper is it compared to how much you're going to spend to park? I don't know. This is what I'm saying. You've just got to weigh up all of these different things. So the next thing is, how are you going to experience Orlando? Let's kind of get in. We've talked about costs. We've talked about where the costs may lie, and only you can decide whether or not those costs are going to be an issue or they're not going or not for yourself, if you know what I mean. So we've kind of covered those bits. We've covered how much costs are going to be roughly. There inevitably are other costs I've probably forgotten about, so I do apologise. But the next thing is the experience of having a car. So this is where you're going to get value out of it. So this is where we're going to look at it and go, you know what? This is the value I actually get out of having a car. So, for one, and I can only look at this really from my point of view, but I'll always try to be kind of like, look at it from everyone's point of view. Do you want to keep getting a Lyft or an Uber every time you want to do anything? Some people won't. I'm not a huge fan on it. I'm not a massive fan on like having to go on apps and have to try and find a driver, wait for it, go to a certain point. I would personally rather just have the keys to the car in my pocket and go to the car. When you get to the end of your day, say you've done a long day at Magic Kingdom and you're getting out the park at 10 o'clock or whatever it is, do you then want to go messing around to get an Uber? Obviously, they'll have certain points where you can just go and jump in one, it's not a problem, but they are going to charge you extra because they know full well people are going to pay it. Or would I rather just go and get in my car and not have to think about it? And that's the same thing applies to like the Disney transportation or the Universal transportation. Their transportation is wonderful. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. It's complimentary. That's the main thing. So if you don't have to pay for these things. You don't have to pay to go on the bus services or the Skyliner, for example, or the monorail or anything like that. Like, you're not having to pay for these services. So take that into account. But would you rather have to wait to get on a bus? Because ultimately you could go and queue for the bus could be full, and then they go, we have to wait for the next one. And it depends how quick they're coming. Obviously, if another one turns up in 2 minutes, then it's not too much of a concern. But if the next one doesn't turn up for 20 minutes, then you're obviously stood there kind of wasting time. It depends where your value for money is. Is your value for money in either being at the park or getting back to your room and going to bed? Or is it in standing at a bus stop? I don't know. But do you know what I mean? Like, if that 20 minutes that you wait for a bus doesn't really bother you, then you've saved yourself some money. So this is it. There are just a lot of factors, and we've just got to weigh it up. And it's personal preference, isn't it? It's personal preference of what people like, people enjoy doing. I like the car. I like the car, and I'm going outside of the parks at this point. I like the car for a number of reasons. You've got Orlando as as a whole, having the flexibility for me to be able to go, right, you know what? I fancy doing a shopping day today. Let's go to the outlets. I can't remember which one it is. Let's go to the premium outlets. Or are those the one at the top of International Drive or the bottom? I'm not sure. But let's go to one of them. Let's go to the one at the top of International Drive. Okay, we've done a couple of hours there. We found some good deals. I tell you what, I wouldn't mind going to Florida Mall. Should we just jump in the car and go there? Like, okay, we've done that. Should we go to the other outlets while we're at it as well? Yeah, go on. Do you know what I mean? You've got so much more flexibility in actually like kind of being able to make a full day out of these kind of activities, opposed to going, well, we've just paid for an Uber to get here, so we don't really want to go and jump in another Uber to go and get to another one, because then we've got to jump in another Uber to go and get back to our resort. Like, obviously in the car, it's a lot easier. I appreciate somebody's got to drive and you've still got to pay for fuel and stuff, but it's an easier experience than it is having to basically pay someone to come and pick you up. So that's one of the main things. I think of shopping as being quite a big one. I think of going out for dinner and going, you know what, obviously some people are absolutely happy to just kind of dine in on site and stuff like that. All for it, fair enough, and absolutely fantastic. Like, absolutely, please do, because it's great, and there's amazing experiences on site, obviously. But I quite like a dining off site. I quite like being able to go to a Cheesecake Factory. And of course you can get an Uber or a Lyft there. That's not a problem. But then you are going to have to get an Uber or a Lyft back. So you are going to incur the charge obviously twice. Obviously, if I decide, you know what, let's go for a Cheesecake Factory, we go and eat it, and then we go, should we go pop into Walmart on the way back? I've got a lot more flexibility in that. So I can basically go and do more activities with my time. That's how I see it. I see it as I basically get the opportunity to go and see more of Orlando in a shorter period of time, because I'm the one basically dictating as and when we go in the car. I love it. I love driving out there. I really do. I think personally I actually quite enjoy the experience. And the final thing I'll say is there are obviously activities that you can do in and around kind of Orlando and Florida which are further afield. So, you know, if you decided we're staying at Disney or Universal, it doesn't really matter, and we want to go to Busch Gardens, you're not going to get an Uber to Tampa, or if you are, you're going to pay through the nose for it. So having the car does is it gives you that flexibility, doesn't it, to go, you know what, we're doing Busch Gardens, we can do Kennedy Space Center, we can go for an airboat tour somewhere, we can go to Clearwater, we can go to these wonderful beaches and stuff like that. It gives you so much more scope to actually go and experience Orlando. I'm all for that. I love Orlando as a place. I absolutely think it's stunning. I think it's a wonderful place, and I think that it's one of the reasons why I made this podcast originally, because I think that there are so many more activities to do outside of Orlando. And that might sound slightly cliche, considering on my most recent trip, I stayed on site and I did a very, very Disney trip. But at the same time, I still had a car, and I feel like we got so much more out of our trip in the time that we had because we had the car. I was able to go and do a lot more activities, and obviously you'll see it as the vlogs come out. But we managed to do more in a day because I feel like we basically weren't spending time waiting around for anything, because we could basically go and do stuff as and when we wanted to do it on our own schedule. So it's all of that kind of stuff, all of that to weigh up. And I'm intrigued to know what other people's point of view are, because I know there's kind of two camps on this. There's two camps, and very much like there is with Disney and Universal. Sometimes you've got the hardcore Disneys or the hardcore Universals, and that's fine. Like, you know, I'm all for sticking by what you believe in and what you love and stuff like that. Like, I'm all for that. No issues whatsoever. So, but what I will say is that I think once you've had a car, I don't think you'd go back. And I could be wrong on that. And there inevitably will be people out there who've had a car before and have gone, you know what, we had the car, we didn't feel like we got a huge amount of benefit out of it, so we're just going to use the Disney transportation because it's brilliant. I mean, spot on. I can't argue it. Of course I can't, and I wouldn't. So I'm just talking from personal experience. But if we're talking about driving as well, I mean, I'm not gonna turn around and tell you that I'm not Jenson Button. I'm not, can't go and start giving you like extreme driving tips for driving in Orlando because I'm not American. Two, I don't live there. Like my experiences from driving in Orlando are from going on holiday. So I love driving out there, and I will give you some tips, but take them with a grain of salt because they're only from my experiences. But like when I first went out there, I will be real. The first time I ever drove in Orlando, I was bricking it. I was proper nervous, and this is funny because at the time I used to work with cars, so I had a lot of experience of driving different cars in England. So I had no issue with driving or like having the confidence to drive. But I got out to America and I'm like, I feel a bit nervous. I feel nervous about it because it's out of the ordinary, isn't it? It's out of your comfort zone, and anything out of your comfort zone makes you feel a little bit kind of uneasy, doesn't it? So, but once I got used to it, and like kind of once I did a bit of research. Don't get me wrong. I watched videos. I read some stuff, and I basically like kind of read up on what a few tips were for driving in Orlando. Because the first time you drive out there, it will feel a little bit bizarre. And like I said, I'll give you a few tips. So, for example, like you don't really get roundabouts. There are some roundabouts, but they're fairly infrequent. But it's mainly crossroads. So you'll come to these massive crossroads, and you basically at times you can be sat there forever, and it will go from red to green without hesitation. Obviously, over here, you get the amber as well. You only get the amber on one way when it's basically turning to red in Orlando. When it's turning to green, you don't get the warning. It's basically red to go. So at the crossroads, you can actually turn right on a red light, which is weird, unless a sign indicates otherwise, and it will say basically up front in front of you, it will say no turn on red. You can come to a crossroad and you can turn right. You basically have to give way to what would be kind of diagonally left of you, and also to the direct left of you. So you basically need to give way. It's essentially a giveaway in this country. So you come up to it, you make sure that there's nothing coming, and then you can turn right on a red, which feels so odd. I tell you, the first few times, absolutely, just like it didn't feel right. It felt so weird, but when you get used to it, spot on. Absolutely brilliant. So there's that. There's things like the road signs. So you'll likely have like your Google Maps, for example. You'll have your Google Maps, or your Apple Maps, or whatever you're using, and it will say road names. The road name. So on a crossroad, you'll see like a road name, like International Drive, will be kind of suspended up in the sky. Whichever way you read that sign, that is the road. So it runs adjacent with the road that road is, if that makes sense. So if you can read International Drive up ahead of you, like up in the sky, that is not the road you're on. That's the road that goes kind of left to right, if you know what I mean. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? It might do, it might not. Next little bit, I think I touched on it earlier, but there was the tolls. Switch them off. Switch off. But avoid tolls on your maps, or your Google Maps on your phone. That way you can avoid obviously paying extra costs. Keep it over to the left. And this is a little bit like when you first learnt to drive over here. You probably found that we drive on the left hand side of the road, but we sit on the right hand side of the vehicle. You probably used to find that you would be like kind of wavering off into the middle of the road a lot when you first learnt to drive. And it's exactly the same out there. You're sat on the left, but you're driving on the right. You kind of need to like hug the line a little bit on your side. It'll feel a little bit strange at first. It feels weird because I feel like I'm driving with the wrong hand as well. But again, you get used to it very, very quickly. This might be a surprise to some people. It might not. Almost always, and I cannot think of any times it wouldn't be, but you will almost always be driving an automatic car. So if you've never driven an automatic car, I wouldn't want that to be a huge shock for you when you turn up, get in the driver's seat and go, I've got a pedal missing. Yeah, some people, obviously nowadays, automatics are a lot more popular. They're a lot more common than they ever used to be as well. So, you know, a lot of people would have driven automatics, but if you haven't, it is something to bear in mind. When you've had an auto, I'm going to be real, you're not going to want to go back. With regards to kind of like fast lanes and stuff, you're going to find like kind of on the highways, it's normally kind of 3 to 4 lanes, and there isn't necessarily a fast lane per se. So obviously in our roads, you say over to the left for the quote unquote slow lane, and then over to the right hand side of a motorway or a dual carriageway is the quote unquote fast lane, isn't it? So that's your overtaking lane. You do not have an overtaking lane in America, so you basically, anyone can overtake you on either side. So that is something to be wary of. So you do need to be looking in your mirrors constantly. And also, it leads me on to the next point, that American or local drivers at very least are ruthless. They will just pull out into the next lane without much warning at all. In the UK, I like to think that we're pretty good. We're using our indicators and stuff, and we basically indicate, look at the mirror, and then turn in. They kind of just like fling the indicator on and go. Like, so you just need to be wary that everyone seems like they're in a rush a lot of the time, and it's fine, but you just need to personally take your time. Like, don't be rushed by other people yourself. Like, concentrate on your driving. Look at this. This is proper tips with Russ here. This is a next level for me. So when you're turning off of the highways, this is one that used to get me a lot when I first drove out there. So you'll find if you're driving on like the right hand side of a highway, sometimes a lane will disappear. And by disappear, I mean it will just turn off. And you would have had prior warning, don't get me wrong, it will say that it's going to, but you will find that at times it basically, you could just be there sat in the right hand lane and then bam, like we're turning off now. And it's like, well, now I've got a right error because I can't turn around. We're going around the bend at this point. So yeah, so it's worth kind of keeping an eye on it. It's always nice to have someone with you as your co-pilot who can kind of be spotting these things as well. But you can turn off on the kind of highways on the left or the right of the highway. So it's another thing to bear in mind. Just because in our country you would only ever turn off a dual carriageway to the left, you would never turn off to the right, because obviously that would be our quote unquote fast lane. They have it quite often that it could be the left or the right that you would turn off the road. It'll feel weird at first, but you will get used to it. So if you're unsure, obviously in this country there's a bit of a stigma about kind of like being a middle lane hog. Over there it doesn't matter. There isn't a fast or a slow lane, so if you're not confident, stay in the middle lane, give yourself the options of both, if you know what I mean. And then the kind of last little tip I've got is you don't really often need to worry about parking. And the reason I say that is some people might be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to get a massive car, I'm going to end up with like a huge 4x4 style vehicle, and I'm not going to feel comfortable with actually parking it in a Walmart. You don't need to worry about it. The parking spaces are massive. Like, you will fit in them with ample room either side. It's never a problem. So that's not something to worry about. I've never found parking or anything like that to be an issue. The roads over there are massive as well. So you don't really need to worry about having a big car and being like tight in the lane like you would in the UK. It's not an issue. So I hope this has been useful. I actually hope that this has been a fairly informative episode. Obviously, I've tried to rattle through a fair amount of information in quite a short amount of time, but it's my outlook on it. It is ultimately my opinion of it. So I hope that some of this is really, useful information for someone. Like, realistically, someone in your party might be looking to drive, and it might be a factor. Even if you're not the one driving, this episode could be useful because it could fall into your budget as well. It could still be, something that you're looking at budgeting, despite the fact you're not the designated driver. But it's good to know, and to have a couple of tips before you go out there is honestly worth its weight in gold. It really is, just to give you a peace of mind and it to not be something to worry about, like, because you will be a bit nervous, like, understandably so. If you basically get in that car and drive out of that airport car park, like, you're straight out on the roads. But you do know how to drive. You do have a license in theory, so you do have the ability to drive. It's just that everything might feel a little bit different than what it does at home. But once you're out there for genuinely like 5-10 minutes, it will just feel fairly normal. And I'll be real with you, I actually really enjoy driving in the US. I actually think that at times it's easier than driving in the UK. And although the drivers out there, some of them are ruthless, they're not quite as arrogant as some are in the UK. But yeah, that's a topic for another day. So thank you, genuinely. Thank you everyone so much. Like, the support that everyone has given over the past few weeks has been mind-blowing. I've got the giveaway still on at the moment. So the giveaway is basically running until Friday evening. So if you haven't had the opportunity to enter the giveaway, I'm basically giving away a t-shirt, any design. So we've got 4 designs, any of the designs, sizes small up to triple XL, and then you're getting 5 pairs of socks as well. So you're getting 5 pairs of Orlando Adventures socks and then 1 Orlando Adventures t-shirt of your choice. And to enter it, you basically need to find that post on the Instagram, like it, subscribe to the YouTube, send me a screenshot of it. And I've got to do that because I basically cannot keep track of everyone who is subscribed because I don't know. And then just share that giveaway post as well. Nice and easy, shouldn't take more than a minute. So if you're up for it, ping me that message and I'll basically let you know you're in the draw. So exciting stuff. And I hope everyone enjoyed the vlog. I really do. Like, obviously I was a bit nervy about it going out. I will be honest. I was a bit nervous because, you know what? I put a lot of time and effort into the podcast. I put a lot of time and effort into the vlogs. I love doing this. It is an absolute passion. And all I ever want to do is try and create good content for all of you guys to watch or listen to. So the feedback I had was incredible. And it absolutely hits me. It hits me hard. And all it ever does is motivate me to do even more. So thank you once again. And I will speak to you all in the next one.